a pregnant wife, a billionaire husband, and a demand that shattered a perfect life. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a saga of public humiliation and spectacular revenge. What happens when a man with everything to lose forces his expectant wife to apologize to his mistress? He learns that hell hath no fury. Like a woman scorned, armed with a team of relentless lawyers and the full attention of court TV. By the time the sun rose on his empire, the world knew his name, his face, and every single one of his secrets. Stick around to hear how one woman's deepest shame became her greatest weapon. Katie Vanderbilt lived a life most people only saw in magazines. Her home, a sprawling minimalist mansion overlooking the Pacific in Malibu, was less a house and more a statement. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls drank in the California sun, reflecting off the white marble floors and the infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the ocean. Her husband, Adrian Vanderbilt, a name that dripped with old money prestige and new money ruthlessness, was the architect of this life. He wasn't just wealthy. He was a titan of industry, a private equity king who could make or break companies with a single phone call. To the outside world, they were the golden couple. Katie, with her classical beauty and a grace that seemed out of place in the modern world, was the perfect counterpart to Adrian's sharp, commanding presence. She was the warm, beating heart to his cold, calculating mind. And now, at 29, she was 6 months pregnant with their first child, a son destined to inherit an empire. The baby was meant to be the final, perfect piece of their meticulously curated life. But a gilded cage, no matter how beautiful, is still a cage. The first cracks in the facade were almost invisible, as fine as a hairline fracture in a diamond. It started with Adrian's phone, a second phone he claimed for international business. It was a sleek black burner he kept locked in his study, a room Katie was tacitly forbidden from entering. Then there were the late nights blamed on deals closing in Hong Kong or London time zones becoming a convenient shield. He would return home in the early hours of the morning, smelling not of the stale air of a corporate jet, but of a faint, unfamiliar perfume. Something floral and audacious, so unlike Katie's subtle signature scent. She tried to ignore the signs, burying her anxieties under a mountain of preparations for the baby. She designed the nursery with a renowned interior decorator, selecting hand-painted wallpaper from France and a crib carved from sustainable Nordic wood. She attended prenatal yoga classes in a sun-drenched studio surrounded by other wealthy wives-to-be, all of them smiling, all of them projecting an aura of blissful fulfillment. Katie smiled too, a carefully practiced expression that didn't quite reach her increasingly troubled eyes. Her friends, women, who had known her since before Adrian noticed the change. "You seem distant, Izzy," said Maya, her closest confidant over lunch at a ridiculously expensive vegan restaurant Adrian despised. "Is everything okay?" Katie picked at her quinoa salad. "Of course. Just tired. The baby, you know." It was the perfect excuse, the one no one could question. But Maya saw through it. "It's not the baby. It's him, isn't it? He was a thundercloud at the charity gala last week. He barely looked at you." Katie's fork clattered against her plate. "He was stressed, Maya. A big merger fell through." She was defending him. She realized, out of habit, out of a desperate need to believe the lie herself. The truth was the distance between them had become a chasm. The easy intimacy they once shared had evaporated, replaced by a tense, transactional dynamic. Their conversations were about schedules, public appearances, and the stock market. He would compliment her dress before they stepped onto a red carpet, not because he noticed her, but because her appearance was a reflection of him. He was a man who curated his life like a museum exhibit, and she was his most prized acquisition. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, the illusion shattered completely. Adrian was supposedly in a board meeting downtown. Katie was sorting through a new delivery of baby clothes, tiny cashmere sweaters, and impossibly small shoes, when a courier arrived with a flat rectangular package addressed to Adrian. It wasn't from a corporate office. The return address was a trendy art gallery in the city. Curiosity, sharp and painful, gnawed at her. She told herself it was wrong, a violation of the trust that she was still pretending existed between them. But the seed of doubt once planted had taken root. Her hands trembled as she carefully sliced open the package. Inside was not a document, but a framed photograph. It was a professional shot, arty and intimate. Adrian was in it, but he wasn't alone. He was sitting on a plush velvet sofa, a glass of whiskey in one hand. His arm was wrapped possessively around the shoulders of a woman Katie had never seen before. She was stunning in a fierce, unconventional way. Sharp cheekbones, a cascade of dark, unruly hair, and eyes that blazed with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. She was leaning into him, her head resting on his shoulder, a small, triumphant smile on her lips. They looked comfortable, familiar a unit. Beneath the photo, a small engraved plaque read, "Chloe and Adrian, celebrating us, 2025. The air left Katie's lungs in a single gut-wrenching gasp. The baby kicked a sharp, sudden movement, as if sensing his mother's distress. She sank onto the floor, the photograph clutched in her hand, the cold reality of the image burning through the carefully constructed fantasy of her life. He wasn't just having an affair, he was celebrating it. He had a whole other life, a whole other us, and she had been nothing more than the beautifully decorated, publicly acceptable cover story. The cage was no longer gilded. It was just a cold, empty prison. And she was trapped inside with his air growing within her. The hours that followed the discovery were a blur of cold, quiet fury. Katie didn't cry. Tears felt like a luxury. She couldn't afford a weakness she couldn't show even to herself. She placed the photograph back in its packaging, resealed it with surgical precision, and left it on the massive mahogany desk in Adrian's forbidden study. It was a silent declaration of war. She spent the rest of the afternoon in the nursery, the scent of fresh paint and new linen doing nothing to soothe the tempest in her soul. She ran her hands over the smooth, curved wood of the crib, a piece of furniture that now felt like a prop in a tragic play. This child, her child, was being born into a lie. The Vanderbilt legacy she was supposed to perpetuate was a hollow monument to deceit. The anger that had been simmering for months finally boiled over, solidifying into a hard, clear resolve. She would not be the silent, complicit wife. Not anymore. Adrian came home just after 9. He strode into the house with his usual air of ownership, loosening his tie as he called out her name. "Katie, I'm home." She emerged from the grand staircase, her posture ramrod straight, her face a mask of serene composure. She had changed into a simple cream-colored silk dress. She wanted him to see what he was throwing away. "You had a package delivered," she said, her voice even and calm, betraying none of the chaos inside her. "It's in your study." A flicker of something annoyance alarm crossed his face before being replaced by his usual impassive expression. "Thank you. Business." He turned to walk away, dismissing her. "From the Dubois Gallery," she added. He froze his back to her. He didn't turn around for a long moment. The silence stretched thick with unspoken accusations. When he finally faced her, his eyes were cold steel. "You opened my mail." It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. "I opened a package addressed to my husband in my home," she retorted, a spark of defiance flaring in her chest. The plaque was very touching. "Celebrating us." "Tell me, Adrian, who is us?" He walked slowly towards her, his movements deliberate, predatory. He stopped just inches from her, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. The faint floral scent of that other woman's perfume clung to his suit jacket. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Katie. You're being hysterical. It must be the pregnancy hormones." The condescension, the casual gaslighting was like a slap in the face. "Don't you dare," she hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do not use our child as an excuse for your infidelity." "Who is she?" He sighed, a long theatrical sound of exasperation, as if dealing with a petulant child. "Her name is Chloe Dubois. She's an artist, a friend. The photo was a gift for her recent gallery opening, which I helped fund. It's business a Katie Hippersumu. Something you wouldn't understand. A friend whose head is on your shoulder. A friend you have a commemorative plaque with." Katie laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the cavernous foyer. "How stupid do you think I am? I think you're emotional and overreacting," he said, his voice hardening. "Chloe is a business associate, a very important one. Her gallery is a major investment. Her connections are vital. You are making a scene over nothing." The confrontation escalated, their voices rising and falling in the sterile, soundproofed mansion. Katie, fueled by months of repressed suspicion, laid out all the evidence, the late nights, the secret phone, the lies. Adrian, trapped, fell back on his most potent weapons, intimidation and dismissal. He twisted her words, painted her as paranoid, and belittled her intelligence. Finally, he played his trump card. "Fine," he said, his voice dropping to a deceptively calm tone. "You want to meet her? You want to see for yourself how nothing this is? Then you'll get your chance. I'm hosting a dinner for her and some potential investors on Friday. Here." Katie was stunned into silence. He would bring his mistress into their home, into the home where she was building a nursery for their son. It was a power play of breathtaking cruelty. "You wouldn't dare," she breathed. "I would, and you will be there," he commanded. "You will be the gracious, supportive wife. You will smile, you will play your part, and you will put Chloe and her guests at ease. This deal is worth 9 figures, Katie. I will not have you jeopardizing it with your suburban paranoia." The days leading up to the dinner were the longest of Katie's life. She moved through her home like a ghost, the air thick with tension. Adrian acted as if their fight had never happened, discussing guest lists and menu options with their private chef, as if it were just another one of their soulless social obligations. Katie, trapped, had no choice but to go along with it. To refuse would be to cede the field entirely. She had to see this through. She had to meet the woman who had co-authored her husband's betrayal. Friday night arrived like a death sentence. Katie dressed with deliberate care, choosing a sapphire blue gown that highlighted her pregnancy, a visible symbol of her role, her claim. She stood beside Adrian at the door, a perfect smiling hostess as the guests arrived. And then she saw her. Chloe Dubois was even more striking in person. She wore a backless black dress, a stark contrast to Katie's vibrant blue. Her dark hair was piled high on her head, and her eyes, the same blazing eyes from the photograph, swept over the magnificent house with a look of cool appraisal. She wasn't just a guest. She was an assessor. Adrian greeted her with a warmth that was painfully, obviously different from how he treated anyone else. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture of casual intimacy that made Katie's stomach clench. "Chloe, darling," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'd like you to finally meet my wife, Katie." Chloe's eyes met Katie's. There was no apology in them, no shame. There was only a flicker of something that looked like pity mingled with victory. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Chloe said, her voice a low, smoky purr. "Adrian has told me so much about you." The rest of the evening was a masterclass in psychological torture. Adrian seated Chloe directly across from Katie at the long dining table. He directed his attention to her laughing at her jokes, hanging on her every word about the volatile art market. Chloe, for her part, played the role of the fascinating, brilliant artist to perfection, captivating the investors, and most of all, the host. Katie felt invisible, a piece of decorative furniture. The final straw came during dessert. One of the investors, a silver-haired man named Mr. Harrington, turned to Chloe. "Your latest installation is genius, Ms. Dubois. Adrian was telling me the inspiration came from a rather passionate, personal experience." Chloe smiled coyly, her eyes darting to Adrian. "Inspiration is everywhere. Sometimes it finds you when you least expect it." The implication was thick and suffocating. Katie felt the blood drain from her face. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the marble floor. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice tight. "I'm not feeling well." She fled to the sanctuary of her bedroom, but there was no escape. Minutes later, Adrian stormed in his face, a mask of cold fury. "What the hell was that?" he seethed. "You embarrassed me. You were rude to my guest." "Your guest, your mistress, you mean?" Katie shot back, her control finally snapping. "In our home, how could you? She is my business partner," he roared. "And thanks to your little stunt, you may have just cost me a very important relationship. Harrington was spooked by your attitude. I don't care about your deal or your Mr. Harrington." "Well, you should," Adrian snarled, grabbing her arm. His grip was like iron. "Because my business pays for this house, for your clothes, for the ridiculous French wallpaper in that nursery. It pays for everything." He let go of her abruptly, and she stumbled back. His eyes were devoid of any warmth, any love. They were the eyes of a CEO assessing a liability. "You will fix this," he said, his voice dropping to a chillingly quiet command. "Tomorrow morning, you will call Chloe, and you will apologize for your behavior. You will tell her you were overwrought and hormonal, and you will beg for her forgiveness for making her feel unwelcome in my home." Katie stared at him aghast. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated cruelty of the demand stole her breath. "Apologize? You want me to apologize to her?" "You heard me," he said, turning to leave. He paused at the door, looking back at her, his face unreadable. "You're a Vanderbilt now, Katie. It's time you learned what that means. It means you protect the family's interests above all else, even your own petty feelings. Make the call." The door clicked shut, leaving Katie alone in the deafening silence, the monstrous, unthinkable demand hanging in the air. He wanted her to kneel to sacrifice the last shred of her dignity on the altar of his greed and his affair. He was asking his pregnant wife to apologize to his mistress. And in that moment, something inside Katie didn't just break. It hardened into steel. Katie spent the night in a guest room, the king-sized bed in her own suite, feeling vast and cold tainted by Adrian's presence. Sleep was impossible. His ultimatum echoed in her mind. You will call Chloe, and you will apologize. Each word was a lash designed to strip her of her dignity, to break her spirit completely. Adrian didn't just want compliance. He wanted subjugation. He wanted her to be a willing participant in her own humiliation. She watched the sun rise over the Pacific, the sky turning from bruised purple to a soft, hopeful pink. For months, she had felt like she was drowning in a sea of polite smiles and unspoken truths. But Adrian's cruelty had been a miscalculation. It hadn't pushed her under. It had forced her head above water. The shock of the cold, clear air was clarifying. The love she thought she had for him, the loyalty she had clung to, had curdled into something else entirely, a cold, hard resolve. He wanted her to kneel. She would learn to fight instead. At 8:00 a.m. her phone buzzed. A text from Adrian. Her number is 555-212-9878. Send me a screenshot of the call log when you're done. It was so transactional, so devoid of emotion. He was managing her like a difficult employee. Katie took a deep, steadying breath. She would make a call, but it wouldn't be to Chloe. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a name she hadn't needed in years, a relic from her life before Adrian. Maya. Her friend answered on the second ring, her voice warm and concerned. Izzy, I was so worried after you left the dinner. Are you okay? No. Katie said the simple, honest word, a profound relief. Maya, I need help. Real help. She told her everything, the photograph, the confrontation, the monstrous demand for an apology. She didn't cry. Her voice was flat, eerily calm. That absolute monster. Maya breathed her voice a mixture of fury and sympathy. Izzy, you have to leave him. Leaving is not enough, Katie replied. He'll crush me, Maya. He'll paint me as unstable, take the baby, and leave me with nothing. He told me as much. I can't just run. I have to dismantle him. The words once spoken solidified her intent. This wasn't just about escaping a bad marriage. This was about justice. What do you need? Maya asked, her voice firm. Do you remember that lawyer your aunt used, the one they called the Shark, the one who took down Senator Matheson? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Julian Croft. Izzy, he's nuclear. He doesn't just win cases, he scorches the earth. Are you sure? Adrian's already set the world on fire, Katie said. I just need someone who isn't afraid to play with matches. Can you get me his private number? An hour later, Katie was sitting in her walk-in closet. The most soundproof room in the house, staring at the number for one of the most feared divorce attorneys in the country. Before she dialed it, she had one more call to make. Adrian's call. She took another phone, one of the half-dozen she owned for various charities and boards, and set it to record. Then, with her heart pounding a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of war, she dialed Chloe Dubois. The artist answered with a sleepy, irritated, "Hello." "Chloe, it's Katie Vanderbilt." There was a short, surprised silence, followed by a low, smug chuckle. "Well, well, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Calling to apologize for your little tantrum last night." The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. It was exactly what Katie had been counting on. She allowed a tremor to enter her voice, playing the part of the broken hormonal wife. "Yes, I wanted to say I'm sorry for how I acted. It was inappropriate. It certainly was. Chloe purred, clearly enjoying herself. You made things very uncomfortable. Adrian was furious. I know, Katie said, her voice small. He told me. He explained that you're a very important business partner. I didn't understand. No, Chloe agreed, her voice dripping with condescension. I don't suppose you would. What Adrian and I have is on a different level. It's a meeting of minds, of ambitions. Not everyone is cut out for that world. The insult was clear. You are not his equal. I am. He said the investors were rattled. Katie continued, feeding her the line. They were, Chloe confirmed. But don't worry your pretty little head about it. I smoothed things over. I always do. I know how to handle men like that. It's an art. I see, Katie whispered. I don't want to cause any more trouble. For Adrian. For the family. Chloe laughed, a sound that was both musical and cruel. Honey, you're the mother of his child. You're the family. I'm the future. Adrian knows what he needs to build his empire, and it isn't a fragile little housewife who gets the vapors at a dinner party. Now, was there anything else? I have a busy day. No, that's all. I'm sorry to have bothered you. Don't worry, Chloe said before hanging up. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other. The line went dead. Katie sat in the silent, perfumed closet, the recording of Chloe's smug confession saved on her device. It was a masterpiece of self-incrimination. She had admitted to the affair, belittled Katie, and confirmed her influence over Adrian and his business. It was ammunition. Katie took a screenshot of her call log, showing the 3-minute call to Chloe's number, and sent it to Adrian. His reply was instantaneous. Good girl. She stared at the 2 words, the patronizing praise of a master for his obedient pet. A cold smile touched her lips. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. He thought he had broken her. He had no idea he had just handed her the first weapon in her arsenal. With trembling but determined hands, she deleted the text and dialed the number Maya had sent her. A crisp, professional voice answered. Julian Croft's office. Hello, Katie said, her own voice suddenly clear and strong. My name is Katie Vanderbilt. I need to schedule a meeting with Mr. Croft immediately. Tell him it's regarding my husband, Adrian Vanderbilt. Tell him I'm ready to go to war. Julian Croft's office was the antithesis of Adrian's world. It wasn't in a gleaming downtown skyscraper, but in a discreet, ivy-covered brownstone in a historic district. There was no marble or glass, only dark wood shelves overflowing with leather-bound legal books and the faint, pleasant smell of old paper and expensive whiskey. It was a room that projected quiet intellectual lethality. Julian Croft himself was just as unassuming and just as dangerous. He was a man in his late 50s, with kind eyes, a perfectly tailored tweed jacket, and a disarming smile. He looked more like a university professor than a shark, which Katie realized was precisely what made him so effective. He listened without interruption as Katie recounted her story, his expression impassive. She played him the recording of her call with Chloe. When it finished, he nodded slowly, a flicker of appreciation in his eyes. That was very well done, Mrs. Vanderbilt. Very well done indeed. You have good instincts. Instincts aren't enough, Katie said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Adrian is powerful. He's insulated. He'll bury me in legal fees and gag orders. He'll say I'm an unfit mother. Yes, he will try. Croft agreed, leaning forward. Men like your husband follow a predictable playbook. Step 1, discredit the wife. Step 2, hide the assets. Step 3, weaponize the children. Our job is to be 2 steps ahead of his playbook at all times. He stood up and walked over to a large whiteboard, previously hidden by a Japanese screen. Infidelity is messy, but in a state like California, it's not the financial windfall people think. The recording is excellent for proving emotional distress, which we will use. But our primary target, he said, uncapping a black marker, is the money. He drew a box and wrote Vanderbilt Equity inside it. Adrian's power comes from this. His reputation, his wealth, his identity are all tied up in it. We're not just going to file for divorce, Katie. We're going to prove that he has used his company, his art gallery investments, and his relationship with Ms. Dubois as instruments of fraud. We will hit him where he is strongest, which is also where he is most vulnerable. The scale of it was terrifying and exhilarating. How? We hire the best, Croft said simply. I'm bringing in a forensic investigator. Her name is Lena Petrova, ex-Mossad, now runs one of the most exclusive corporate intelligence firms in the world. She finds things people have gone to extraordinary lengths to hide. The meeting with Lena took place 2 days later in the same office. She was a stark contrast to Croft Sharp, severe, dressed in black, with piercing grey eyes that seemed to see right through you. She spoke in clipped, precise sentences. "Your husband is careless," Lena said, after listening to the briefing, her accent faintly Eastern European. "Arrogant men always are. This burner phone is a good start. The art gallery is better. Unregulated markets are a playground for men like him. I'll start there." Katie's role in the coming weeks was the hardest she would ever have to play the defeated wife. She moved back into the master suite. She was quiet, subdued, and compliant. She spoke only when spoken to. She attended his insipid charity functions on his arm, her smile vacant, her eyes downcast. She let him believe he had won, that he had successfully crushed her spirit. The performance was agonizing. Every polite nod, every feigned smile felt like a betrayal of the rage that was simmering just beneath the surface. Adrian, for his part, reveled in her submission. He became more brazen, leaving his international business phone on his nightstand, taking calls from Chloe in the next room, assuming Katie was too broken to care or notice. He was a predator who had neutralized his prey and had grown lazy, no longer bothering to hide his tracks. Meanwhile, Lena Petrova's team was a silent, invisible force moving in the background. They put a tail on Adrian and Chloe. They began dissecting the gallery's finances, cross-referencing shipping manifests with sales records. They planted a listening device in Chloe's art studio. Maya was Katie's lifeline. They met for yoga or lunch, using the outings to exchange information. In the back of a chauffeured car, Katie would pass Maya a thumb drive with photos she'd taken of documents Adrian had carelessly left on his desk. Maya would pass back a burner phone of their own with encrypted messages from Julian Croft. "Lena found something," Maya whispered during one such exchange, her eyes wide. "The investors from that dinner party. They don't exist. Not in the financial world anyway. They're proxies. The money Adrian is pouring into Chloe's gallery isn't an investment. It's being funneled out." The storm was gathering clouds massing on the horizon, unseen by the man who believed he controlled the weather. Every day that Katie played the part of the perfect broken doll, the net around Adrian Vanderbilt grew tighter. She would feel a surge of panic sometimes, a fear that he would see through her act. But then she would feel her son kick a small, steady reminder of what she was fighting for. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for a future free from the gilded cage, a future for a child who deserved to know a mother's strength, not a father's tyranny. 2 weeks into the investigation, Lena Petrova called for an urgent face-to-face meeting. This time they met in the sterile conference room of a high-end hotel, a neutral ground. The air crackled with intensity. "Your husband's scheme is bigger than we thought." Lena began sliding a thin folder across the polished table to Julian Croft. "Chloe Dubois is not the mastermind. She's a high-class honey trap, but she's taking orders." She projected an image onto the wall. It was a grainy surveillance photo of Chloe meeting a man at a quiet cafe. The man's back was mostly to the camera, but his profile was distinct. Julian Croft swore softly under his breath. "Marcus Thorne," Julian said, his voice grim. "Adrian's biggest rival. They've been at each other's throats for a decade. Thorne has been shorting Vanderbilt Equities stock for 6 months, Lena explained. He's been using the information Chloe provides about Adrian's upcoming deals to bet against him. The affair isn't just for pleasure. It's industrial espionage, and Adrian, blinded by his own ego, has been walking him right into the vault." But the real bombshell was the financial web Lena had untangled. The art gallery is a laundry. Adrian isn't just hiding assets from a potential divorce. He's cleaning money. We don't know from where yet, but it's big and it's dirty. The investors from the dinner were Thorne's people. The whole event was a charade to justify a massive wire transfer to an offshore account owned by a shell corporation which Thorne controls. Katie felt a chill run down her spine. This had spiraled far beyond a marital dispute. This was organized crime in $1,000 suits. "The photograph," Katie said suddenly, the pieces clicking into place. "The one they sent to the house. The plaque said, 'Celebrating us, 2025. Lena nodded, a rare smile touching her lips. "We cracked it. It's not a date. It's an account number. 2025. The name of the shell corporation is Celebratus LLC. He literally sent evidence of his money laundering scheme to his own house. The arrogance is poetic. They had the scheme, but they needed irrefutable hard proof that would stand up in federal court. They needed the source of the dirty money. They needed Adrian's own words. They needed the burner phone. He keeps it in his study," Katie said, her voice barely a whisper. "The room is always locked. Biometric scanner on the door." "There's always a back door," Lena said, her gaze intense. "Think Katie. Has he ever mentioned a fail-safe and emergency override?" Katie's mind raced. She thought back to the early days of their marriage, before the secrets and the silence. They had been sitting by the grand fireplace in the main hall one night, a rare moment of quiet connection. He'd been telling her about the construction of the house, boasting about its security. "Everything has a flaw," he'd said with a smirk, swirling the brandy in his glass. "A secret. For instance, the moron who designed this fireplace left one of the bricks in the back loose. Perfect place to hide a spare key, if one were so inclined. He had been drunk and boastful, trying to impress her with his cleverness. He would never imagine she would remember, let alone use it against him." The opportunity came 2 nights later. Adrian was in New York closing a deal that Katie now knew was likely another fraudulent transaction. The staff had retired for the night. The house was silent, a sleeping giant. With her heart in her throat, Katie crept downstairs to the main hall. The dying embers in the fireplace cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. She knelt on the hearth, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. She reached deep inside the cold fireplace, her fingers searching the rough brickwork. And then she felt it, a single brick that shifted under her touch. She worked it loose, her nails scraping against the soot-covered stone. Behind it was a small, hollow space. and inside that space was a single heavy key. Her hands trembled as she walked to the study. The key slid into an almost invisible lock below the biometric panel. With a soft click, the heavy oak door swung open. The study was Adrian's inner sanctum. It smelled of leather cigar smoke and power. On the massive desk next to his laptop sat the sleek black burner phone. She grabbed it. But as she turned to leave, something else caught her eye. It was a leather-bound ledger hidden beneath a stack of financial reports. It wasn't from Vanderbilt Equity. It had no markings. On a hunch, she opened it. The pages were filled with Adrian's precise handwriting. It was a detailed record of cash deposits, names she didn't recognize, and corresponding transfers to offshore accounts. The numbers were staggering, far exceeding even his declared income. This wasn't just hiding marital assets. This was a record of his crimes. She took the phone and the ledger. Back in the safety of her closet, she photographed every single page of the ledger with the burner phone Maya had given her and sent the encrypted files to Julian and Lena. She then wiped the key clean and returned it to its hiding place behind the brick, leaving the study door locked just as she had found it. She had been a Trojan horse. Adrian had brought her into his life as a beautiful object to be displayed, a vessel to carry his heir. He had no idea that he had just let his greatest enemy into the heart of his fortress, and she was about to burn it to the ground. "We have him." Lena Petrova's voice on the encrypted call was flat, but Katie could hear the undercurrent of triumph. Lena's team of digital wizards had cracked Adrian's burner phone in less than 12 hours. It wasn't just a gold mine, it was the mother lode. "The ledger you found details the source of the dirty money," Julian Croft explained, his voice patched into the same call. "For years, Adrian has been running a consulting service for some very unsavory international clients, oligarchs, arms dealers. He helps them launder their money through the US financial system, using his company as a front. Vanderbilt Equity isn't just his company. It's his washing machine." The scope of his criminality was sickening, but it was the contents of the phone itself that struck the most personal blow. He and Chloe were prolific texters. Lena said, a rare note of distaste in her voice. They documented everything. She had sent a password-protected file to Katie. With a deep breath, Katie opened it. It was a transcript of hundreds of text messages between her husband and his mistress. Reading them felt like drinking poison. They mocked her relentlessly. They called her the Malibu princess, the gilded broodmare, the porcelain doll. They laughed about her naivete, her classical taste, her pregnancy. "Chloe, is the doll playing nesting games today? Picking out more tiny socks? Adrian, she's designing a nursery fit for a king. Bless her simple little heart, it keeps her busy." Worse than the insults were the plans. They had a detailed roadmap for what would happen after their son was born. Adrian, 6 weeks after the birth. That's the window. We'll have a psychologist on retainer. We'll document her postpartum depression, her instability. Chloe. And the prenup holds Adrian ironclad. But we won't even need it. I'll get full custody. She'll be lucky to get supervised visits once a month. The Vanderbilt name is everything. The court will see her as a gold-digging hysteric. I'll make sure of it. The words swam before Katie's eyes. The cruelty was so calculated, so absolute. He had been planning to strip her of her child, her reputation, her sanity. The baby she carried wasn't a symbol of their love. It was a pawn in his endgame. And then there was the final piece of the puzzle, the betrayal by Marcus Thorne. The texts confirmed everything Lena had suspected. Chloe Thorne is pleased. The tip about the biotech merger paid off. He's wiring the first payment to Celebratus. Adrian excellent. Keep him happy. Once we've bled him for a few more quarters, we'll expose him and get him out of my way for good. 2 birds, 1 stone. Katie's blood ran cold. Adrian wasn't just a victim of Thorne's espionage. He was a willing participant planning to double-cross his rival in the end. He was playing a 3-dimensional chess game of greed and betrayal, and he saw everyone, his wife, his mistress, his rival, as disposable pieces. Katie, Julian's voice cut through her shock. This is everything. We have racketeering money, laundering, wire fraud, conspiracy, and industrial espionage. This is no longer a divorce proceeding. This is a federal case. We hold all the cards. What do we do now? She asked, her voice shaking with a potent cocktail of rage and adrenaline. Men like Adrian only understand one thing: total annihilation. Julian said, his tone turning from lawyer to field general. We will not quietly file for divorce. We will not negotiate a settlement. We will detonate this in the most public, most devastating way imaginable. We will go to the press. The plan was audacious. They wouldn't leak to a gossip columnist. That was Adrian's territory. They would go to Susan Davies, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, known for taking down corporate criminals. Simultaneously, Julian would file a RICO lawsuit on Katie's behalf, a civil charge typically reserved for mob bosses, which would immediately trigger investigations by the SEC and the FBI. The final piece of the puzzle, Julian said, is the narrative. Susan Davies will handle the financial crimes, but we need to control the human story. We need to show the world the man you married, and for that, we will use his own words against him. He was talking about the recording of the phone call, the call where she had been forced to apologize. When do we do this? Katie asked. Next Monday morning, Julian replied. Adrian is scheduled to give the keynote address at the Global Finance Summit at 9:00 a.m. He'll be standing on a stage in front of the whole world when his empire collapses around him. The week passed in a haze of terrifying anticipation. Katie continued her performance, the dutiful, silent wife. On Sunday night, Adrian packed his suitcase for the conference in New York. You'll watch me on TV tomorrow, won't you? He said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. It's my biggest speech of the year. Of course, Adrian, she said, her voice a perfect, soft murmur. I wouldn't miss it for the world. He smiled, satisfied, and leaned down to kiss her forehead. The touch of his lips on her skin made her want to recoil, but she remained perfectly still. It was the last time he would ever touch her. As he walked out the door, she placed a hand on her belly. The unraveling was about to begin. Monday morning. The sun streamed into the Malibu mansion, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, triumphant sparks. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the light didn't feel like an interrogation lamp exposing her flaws. It felt like a promise, a clean slate. Katie sat on the edge of a vast white sofa in the cavernous living room. A mug of chamomile tea cradled in her hands. Its warmth, a small anchor in the storm she knew was about to break. The television was on, tuned to a 24-hour business news channel. On the screen, a polished graphic read, Global Finance Summit Live Coverage from New York. She was a general in her war room watching the battlefield from afar. At precisely 8:00 a.m. Eastern Time, as if a switch had been thrown, the world changed. Susan Davies's article went live on the Wall Street Journal homepage. The headline was a digital bombshell designed for maximum impact: Vanderbilt's web. How a titan of finance used his empire for fraud, espionage, and global money laundering. It was accompanied by a stern, unsmiling photo of Adrian. 1 minute later, at 8:01 a.m., Julian Croft's office electronically filed the 200-page RICO lawsuit with the federal court. It was a declaration of war, now a public record. At 8:05 a.m., Croft, flanked by a stone-faced Lena Petrova, stepped up to a podium in front of a frantic bank of news cameras. He had called a press conference for an announcement regarding a prominent financial figure, and the mystery had drawn every major news outlet. The mystique of the reclusive shark had guaranteed a full house. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm and authoritative, cutting through the chatter. "My name is Julian Croft. I represent Katie Vanderbilt, the wife of Adrian Vanderbilt." A palpable shockwave rippled through the crowd. This wasn't about a corporate merger. This was personal. This was salacious. This was a story. For months, Croft continued, his gaze sweeping over the reporters. My client has been the victim of a campaign of extreme emotional cruelty and psychological abuse at the hands of her husband. But this is not merely a domestic issue, as men of Mr. Vanderbilt's power often hope it will be. We have uncovered a vast criminal conspiracy helmed by Mr. Vanderbilt, one that uses his company, his marriage, and his public reputation as a shield. He laid it all out: the money laundering for foreign oligarchs, the shell corporations with names that were a private joke, the brazen industrial espionage in collusion with his supposed arch-rival Marcus Thorne. He provided account numbers, offshore jurisdictions, names and dates. The reporters scribbled furiously, fingers flying across keyboards, the sound like a swarm of insects. Mr. Vanderbilt's financial crimes are extensive, Croft said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing the room into a conspiratorial hush. But to understand the character of the man, you need to understand his cruelty on a personal level. Several weeks ago, after my client discovered his long-standing affair with an artist named Chloe Dubois, Mr. Vanderbilt forced his 6 months pregnant wife to do something unconscionable. He forced her to call his mistress and apologize for being upset. A collective gasp, sharp and audible, went through the press corps. It was the detail that made the story unforgettable. The human anchor in a sea of financial jargon. "We have a recording of that call," Croft said, nodding to an aide who placed a small, powerful speaker on the podium. He held it up to the microphone. Katie's trembling, apologetic voice filled the air, the voice of a woman she no longer was. It was followed by the lazy, smug, arrogant purr of Chloe Dubois. "What Adrian and I have is on a different level. A meeting of minds. I'm the future. Don't worry your pretty little head about it." The recording was devastatingly effective. It painted a picture of such profound arrogance and casual cruelty that no one could fail to be moved. It gave a human face, a villainous sneer to the complex financial crimes. Meanwhile, on the business channel, the anchors were just introducing Adrian. He walked onto the stage in New York to thunderous applause, the conquering hero of capital. He radiated confidence, flashing a perfectly white smile at the adoring crowd. He smoothed his $1,000 suit, adjusted the microphone, and prepared to speak. Then chaos erupted. The detonation had begun. An aide, his face pale with panic, rushed onto the stage and whispered frantically in his ear. Adrian's confident smirk faltered, replaced by confusion, then disbelief, then a wave of pure, ashen horror. He stared out at the audience, his mouth slightly agape as a sea of phones began to buzz and glow throughout the auditorium. The news had broken. The hive had been alerted. The business channel's coverage cut away from the summit abruptly. A new stark red graphic flashed on the screen. Breaking news. Adrian Vanderbilt accused of massive fraud. RICO lawsuit filed. And then his face was everywhere. Court TV immediately launched a live special, The Vanderbilt Betrayal, with a panel of legal experts already dissecting the lawsuit with glee. His corporate headshot was plastered next to screenshots of the Wall Street Journal article, and most damningly a photo of him with Chloe from the gallery. News helicopters were suddenly hovering over his New York hotel, his Malibu home, and the glass and steel tower of Vanderbilt Equity. In his office tower, his board of directors, men who had idolized him hours before, convened an emergency meeting to invoke the moral turpitude clause in his contract. In another part of the city, FBI agents were securing a warrant. At her gallery, a frantic Chloe Dubois was trying to book a one-way flight to Bali. But it was too late. Two plainclothes detectives looking deeply unimpressed with her avant-garde sculptures were already walking through her door. Katie watched it all unfold, a remote and silent observer to the demolition of her old life. She saw live footage of Adrian being hustled off the stage by security, his face a mask of incandescent fury and disbelief, shouting at his own people. She saw Marcus Thorne's company logo flashing on the screen as his role as a co-conspirator was revealed. The biter had been bit. The gilded cage had not just been opened, it had been vaporized in a fireball of his own making. The doorbell rang a gentle chime in the quiet house. It was Maya holding a bottle of non-alcoholic champagne, her face beaming. She came and sat beside Katie, wordlessly wrapping an arm around her. They watched together as the news channels played the clip of Julian Croft's press conference again and again. They watched as Adrian's face, once a symbol of untouchable power and masculine arrogance, became the face of public disgrace. Katie took a sip of her tea, the warmth spreading through her. A small, genuine smile touched her lips, the first real smile in over a year. She placed a hand on her stomach, where her son gave a gentle rolling kick, as if he too could feel the seismic shift in the world. He wouldn't be born a Vanderbilt in the way Adrian had intended a prince to a corrupt king. He would not inherit a legacy of lies, secrets, and cruelty. He would inherit something far more valuable, a legacy of strength, of justice, of resilience, forged in fire by a mother who had refused to be broken. She was free, and a new day, bright and full of possibility, was dawning. And that is how a man who had everything lost it all. Adrian Vanderbilt thought his power was absolute, but he forgot the one variable. He couldn't control the strength of the woman he'd tried to crush. Katie's story is a powerful reminder that dignity is not for sale, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way to the light. His empire crumbled, his name was disgraced, and his face became a permanent fixture on court TV, a testament to his own spectacular downfall. Thank you for watching this incredible story of betrayal and revenge. If you were as captivated as we were, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good real-life drama. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories you won't want to miss. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. He stood at the pinnacle of his world, a king in a glass tower, overlooking a city that bowed to his wealth. He had it all, a billion-dollar company, a name that commanded respect, and a beautiful wife carrying his first child. But in a single brutal moment, the gleam of ambition in his eyes turned to poison. He made a choice, trading his family for a bigger fortune, throwing his pregnant wife out into the cold, unforgiving night. He believed he was untouchable. He never imagined that her quiet, unassuming father was the one man on earth who could dismantle his entire empire with nothing more than a keyboard and a lifetime of silent promises. This is the story of how a titan of industry was brought to his knees not by a rival, but by a father's love, and forced to bow before the family he tried to destroy. Ethan Blackwood loved the view from his penthouse. It was a conqueror's view. From the 63rd floor, the city of Seattle sprawled below a tapestry of glittering lights and crawling traffic. Every pinprick of light representing a life he had in some small way surpassed. His company, Blackwood Capital, was a leviathan in the world of high-frequency trading, a machine of his own design that devoured market inefficiencies and spat out obscene profits. At 34, he was the self-made king of a digital empire, and his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass was that of a man who had never known failure. His wife, Clara, was the perfect complement to his steel-edged ambition. She was the soft grace to his hard angles, an artist whose gentle spirit seemed to soothe the frantic predatory energy that always thrummed just beneath his skin. They had met 3 years prior at a charity gala. He was there to network a shark in a tuxedo, and she was there because her latest painting had been donated for the auction. He'd been captivated not by her beauty alone, but by her utter lack of artifice. She didn't know who he was, and when he told her, she wasn't impressed by the money, but curious about the mind that built the machine. Their life was a meticulously curated dream. Dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, spontaneous trips to Paris on the private jet, a home filled with priceless art and minimalist furniture. Yet for Clara, the penthouse sometimes felt less like a home and more like a beautiful, sterile museum. Ethan was often distant, his mind 1,000 miles away, lost in the cascading numbers and algorithms that were his true passion. She loved him deeply, but she loved the man she saw in rare, unguarded moments, the one who would watch old movies with her, his head in her lap, or the one who truly listened as she described the colors of a sunset. The news of her pregnancy was supposed to be the final, perfect piece of their life. When she told him, placing his hand on her still, flat stomach, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes she couldn't decipher. It wasn't the pure, unadulterated joy she had expected. It was more complex, like a master strategist recalculating variables on a battlefield. "A son?" He'd said, his voice a low hum. "A Blackwood heir, to carry on the name." It wasn't "our baby" or "I'm so happy." It was about legacy, about an asset. The coldness of it was a tiny splinter in her heart, one she tried desperately to ignore. The distance between them grew in the following months. Ethan was working on the biggest deal of his career, a hostile takeover of Sterling Industries, a much older, more established tech firm, run by the formidable Harrison Sterling. It was a brutal, bloody corporate war, and Ethan was consumed by it. He came home later, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity, the scent of coffee and ozone clinging to his clothes. Clara, now 4 months pregnant and starting to show, tried to be the supportive wife. She made sure his favorite single malt was waiting. She ran him baths. She tried to talk to him about names for the baby, about turning one of the spare rooms into a nursery. "Not now, Clara." He'd snap his gaze, fixed on the multiple monitors in his home office. "This Sterling deal is everything. Do you have any idea what this means?" She didn't, not really. She just knew it was taking her husband from her. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Ethan came home early, which was unusual. He didn't look tired. He looked energized, electric. There was a cruel, triumphant smirk on his face she hadn't seen before. "I did it," he announced, shrugging off his $1,000 coat and tossing it onto a chair. "I broke him. Harrison Sterling is finished." "Ethan, that's good," she said, confused by his tone. "It's better than good. It's magnificent," he said, pouring himself a drink. He turned to her, and his eyes were cold, assessing. "Clara, we need to talk." The splinter in her heart twisted. "Okay," she said, her hand instinctively going to her belly. He took a long swallow of his drink before speaking. "The terms of the final acquisition are delicate. Harrison is a proud man. To make this work, to merge our companies and create a true global powerhouse, certain alliances must be made." "Alliances? What do you mean?" He walked over to the window, his back to her. "Harrison has a daughter, Isabella Sterling. She's brilliant, ruthless. She's been running their European division. She's a partner, in the truest sense of the word." A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into Clara's veins. "Ethan, what are you saying?" He turned around, and any trace of the man she loved was gone. In his place was a stranger, a predator, who had just closed in on his prey. "The deal is contingent on a merger of families as well as companies. A marriage between me and Isabella. It solidifies the empire. It's the final move on the chessboard." The world tilted. The crystal glass of water in her hand slipped and shattered on the polished marble floor. A marriage, Ethan, you're married to me. We're having a baby." Her voice was a choked whisper. "That," he said, gesturing dismissively at her stomach, "is a complication, an unfortunate variable." The cruelty of his words was like a physical blow. "A complication. This is your child. It's a problem I can solve with money," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I will set you up, you and the child. You'll have an apartment, a generous trust fund. You'll want for nothing. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, of course. To everyone, our marriage simply didn't work out. Amicable split." Tears were streaming down her face, now hot and furious. "You think you can buy your child? You think you can just erase us because we're no longer convenient for your business deal? Who are you?" "I am the man who is offering you a comfortable life," he said, his patience thinning. "This is a much better deal than you'd get from any divorce court. I'm being generous." "Generous?" she shrieked, the sound raw and broken. "You're a monster." His face hardened into a mask of pure, chilling indifference. "I am a realist. This is the world I operate in. Love, sentiment. They are luxuries, Clara, liabilities. I am building an empire, and an empire requires sacrifice. Isabella understands that. You, with your paintings and your feelings, you were a pleasant diversion. But the game has changed." He walked to the bedroom and came back with her suitcase, the one she used for weekend trips. He opened it on the floor. "Pack your things," he said. "The doorman will call you a car. I want you out of here tonight." She stared at him, at the suitcase, at the shattered pieces of glass and the shattered pieces of her life on the floor. "Ethan, please," she begged, one last desperate appeal. "Don't do this. Think about our baby." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for a second she thought she saw a flicker of doubt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by an iron resolve. "The deal with Sterling closes in a month. Isabella is already flying in." "You need to be gone," he stated, as if discussing a line item on a balance sheet. "The choice is simple, Clara. Leave with the money and your dignity, or be thrown out with nothing. But either way, you are leaving. The love she had for him curdled into something bitter and cold. The man she had married was a ghost, a fiction she had created in her own mind. This man, this creature of pure, unadulterated greed, was the reality. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she stopped crying. She squared her shoulders and looked him dead in the eye. "I don't want your money, Ethan. I don't want anything from you." She turned, walked into the bedroom, and packed not her expensive clothes or jewelry, but the few things that truly mattered: a photo of her parents, a book of poetry her mother had given her, and the first ultrasound picture of their baby. When she came back out, he was on his phone already talking business, his voice sharp and commanding. He didn't even look up as she walked past him, her suitcase rolling softly on the marble floor. As she waited for the elevator, the cold reality hit her. She was 4 months pregnant, homeless, and her life had just been liquidated like a failing stock. And the man she once promised to love for eternity hadn't even had the decency to say goodbye. The taxi ride felt like a descent into a different reality. The gleaming skyscrapers of downtown Seattle, once symbols of a shared future, now seemed to mock her, their lights cold and alien. Each drop of rain that slid down the window was a tear for the life that had just been so clinically excised. The driver, a kind-faced man named George, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with concern. He had asked, "Where to, ma'am?" And all she could whisper was an address in Bainbridge Island, an address she hadn't called home in years. The ferry ride across Puget Sound was a blur of mist and sorrow. Clara stood on the deck, the cold, salty wind whipping at her face, pulling her coat tighter around her pregnant belly. It was as if she was crossing a Stygian river, leaving the land of the living, or at least the world of Ethan Blackwood, behind. She was heading home. Her parents, Robert and Mary Thompson, lived in a modest, cedar-shingled house nestled amongst pine trees overlooking the water. It was the house she grew up in, a place of warmth, worn wooden floors, and the constant smell of her mother's baking, and the faint, clean scent of her father's workshop. When the taxi pulled up the gravel driveway, the porch light was already on, casting a warm, welcoming glow. Her mother Mary must have been watching from the window. The front door flew open before Clara had even paid the driver. Mary Thompson was a woman whose kindness was etched into the lines around her eyes. She took one look at her daughter's pale, tear-streaked face and the single suitcase, and her expression shifted from confusion to a fierce, maternal understanding. "Oh, my baby," she whispered, wrapping Clara in a hug that smelled of cinnamon and home. Clara collapsed into her mother's arms, the carefully constructed dam of her composure finally breaking, and she sobbed long and raggedly. Inside her father, Robert Thompson, was standing by the fireplace. He was a tall, quiet man, a retired software architect whose gentle demeanor belied a mind of formidable intellect. He was a man of few words, but his presence was a bedrock. He took her suitcase from her hand, his large, calloused hand briefly squeezing hers. It was all the comfort he needed to offer. She knew he was there. Over hot tea and toast that Clara couldn't eat, she told them everything. The words tumbled out in a broken, agonizing stream: the sterling deal, Isabella; the cold, transactional way Ethan had dismissed her and their unborn child. She spoke of the ultimatum, the suitcase, the utter finality in his eyes. Mary listened, her face a mask of grief and fury, tears welling in her own eyes. Robert, however, was unnervingly still. He sat in his old leather armchair, his hands steepled under his chin, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch. He just listened, absorbing every single painful detail. The silence from him was more profound than any shout could have been. When Clara finished, her voice raw and hoarse, Mary was the first to speak. That monster. I will call a lawyer first thing in the morning. We will fight him. He will not get away with this. Clara shook her head, feeling utterly defeated. What's the point, Mum? He has a team of the best lawyers in the country. He'll bury us in legal fees. He said he would. He'll paint me as a gold digger and drag my name through the mud. I can't. Robert finally moved. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and his eyes, when they met Clara's, were not filled with pity but with a calm, analytical fire. Did he threaten you? He asked, his voice low and even. Not physically, Clara said. He just made it clear. I was an obstacle to be removed, that I should take the money and disappear quietly for my own good. And you have this in writing, any emails, texts? No, she whispered. He was too smart for that. It was all in person, in our home. Robert nodded slowly, his mind clearly working, processing the information like lines of code. He looked at her belly, then back at her face. You are safe here, he said. It wasn't a platitude. It was a statement of absolute fact. You and your child will have everything you need. This is your home. You will not worry about money. You will not worry about Ethan Blackwood. Later that night, tucked into her childhood bed, the familiar scent of lavender from her mother's garden drifting through the window, Clara felt a fragile sense of safety. But beneath it, a current of fear still ran deep. Ethan wasn't just a man. He was a force of nature in his world. He crushed his enemies. What was to stop him from crushing her just to be thorough? She drifted into a troubled sleep and woke hours later thirsty. As she padded down the hallway, she saw a light on in her father's study. The door was slightly ajar. Peeking in, she saw him sitting in front of a complex multi-monitor computer setup, a system far more advanced than anything a typical retiree would own. The screen was filled with flowing lines of code market data streams and complex network architecture diagrams. He wasn't looking at family photos or reading the news. He was working. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. On one screen, she saw the corporate structure of Blackwood Capital. On another, a deep-dive analysis of its core trading algorithms. Clara had always known her father was brilliant. In the 90s, he had been a legendary, albeit reclusive figure in the nascent world of fintech. He'd designed some of the foundational security protocols and trading architectures that the modern financial system was built upon, then abruptly retired in his late 40s, claiming he wanted a simpler life, away from the vultures of Wall Street. He'd cashed out his patents for a comfortable but not extravagant sum, and never looked back. Ethan had always dismissed him as Clara's quiet dad, the retired coat monkey. He had no idea who Robert Thompson really was. No one did, except a very small, very powerful circle of old-school tech pioneers. Watching him now, Clara understood. Her quiet, gentle father was not just looking at data. He was mapping out a battlefield. He was sharpening weapons she couldn't comprehend. The stillness she had seen earlier was not resignation. It was the deep, focused calm of a grand master contemplating a chessboard, seeing not just the next move, but the entire game 20 moves ahead. He wasn't going to call a lawyer. He was going to war. A strange sense of peace settled over Clara. The fear didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else, a sliver of awe. Ethan Blackwood had built his empire on code and algorithms. He had just made a mortal enemy of the man who had written the language. Ethan Blackwood felt invincible. With Clara gone, a sentimental weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The penthouse, once softened by her presence, was now exactly as he liked it, a pristine, silent monument to his success. There were no more gentle questions about his day, no more talk of nurseries or baby names. There was only the clean, exhilarating hum of ambition. Isabella Sterling arrived from London 2 days later. She was everything Clara was not. Where Clara was warm, Isabella was polished steel. She was sharp, impossibly chic, with an analytical mind that mirrored Ethan's own. They didn't speak of love. They spoke of synergy, of market share, of consolidating power. Their relationship was a merger, a strategic alliance, and the chemistry between them was born not of passion, but of a shared, ravenous hunger for dominance. "Your ex-wife," Isabella said on her first night in the penthouse, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux. "Was she a problem?" "She was at a loose end," Ethan replied, not looking up from a tablet displaying market projections. "I've tied it. No legal complications, no emotional attachments." "I made her a financial offer she couldn't refuse." He lied smoothly. "She's pragmatic. She took the money and is looking for a fresh start." He saw no need to tell Isabella about the pregnancy. It was an irrelevant data point, a variable he had already contained. To mention it would be to show weakness, a crack in his perfect, calculated facade. Their days became a whirlwind of meetings with lawyers, bankers, and PR firms. The merger of Blackwood Capital and Sterling Industries was being heralded in the financial press as the deal of the decade. Ethan Blackwood, the wunderkind of algorithmic trading, joins forces with the Sterling dynasty to create a new global tech titan, Sterling Blackwood. His face was on the cover of Forbes, his name spoken with reverence on cable news. He was no longer just rich. He was becoming a legacy. He completely forgot about Clara and her quiet father. They were a footnote from a previous chapter, irrelevant to the epic he was now writing. He'd had his assistant David wire a one-time severance of $500,000 to Clara's old bank account, an account he assumed she'd empty immediately. When the wire was returned a week later, marked refused, he felt a flicker of annoyance, not concern. "Stubborn," he muttered to David. "Fine, her loss. Let her see what it's like in the real world without my safety net." David Hayes, a young, fiercely intelligent analyst who had been with Ethan from the beginning, looked uneasy. "Sir, are you sure about this, I mean?" Her family is a retired programmer from some island," Ethan scoffed. "What are they going to do?" "Send me a strongly worded email. Focus on the Sterling integration." David, that's all that matters. But David, who had always admired Clara's kindness, felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. He had seen the returned wire transfer. It wasn't just a refusal. It was a statement. Meanwhile, on Bainbridge Island, Robert Thompson was not writing emails. He was activating a network not of lawyers, but of legends. His first call was to a man named Julian Ghost Vance, a cybersecurity savant living in a remote cabin in Utah. Julian owed his entire career to Robert, who had mentored him as a teenager and kept him out of federal prison. "Robert," Julian's voice crackled over the encrypted line. "It's been a decade. I thought you'd fallen off the earth." "I need a ghost in a machine, Julian," Robert said, his voice calm and steady. "A very specific machine. Blackwood Capital." Blackwood, The HFT Golden Boy. That place is a fortress. Their security architecture is top of the line. I know, Robert said. I designed the core principles it's based on 20 years ago, and I know the flaws I never bothered to publish. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. Oh, this is going to be fun. What do you need, old man? I don't want you to steal anything. I don't want you to break anything, Robert instructed. I just want you to watch. I want to know every trade, every algorithm shift, every data packet that moves in and out of their servers. I want you to whisper in their wires. His next call was to an old colleague, a mathematics professor at MIT named Dr. Aris Thorne, a man who could see patterns in chaos that no one else could. Aris, Robert said. I'm sending you a data packet. It contains the trading philosophy of a certain firm. I need you to build a counter-rhythm, a model that doesn't defeat it but harmonizes with it in a way that introduces subtle discord. His third call was to a woman on the board of the largest pension fund in California, a woman he had tutored in quantitative analysis when she was just a struggling graduate student. He didn't ask for a favor. He simply advised her as an old friend to review the risk profile of her fund's exposure to newer aggressive HFT firms, particularly those with a single point of leadership. He was not gathering an army to lay siege to Ethan's castle. He was gathering termites, a quiet, invisible force that would chew away at the foundations until the entire gleaming structure was ready to collapse at the slightest push. He worked silently mostly at night while Clara slept, and Mary worried. He was a patient man, playing a very long game. He knew that to destroy a man like Ethan Blackwood, you didn't attack his money directly. You attacked his reputation, his genius, his very sanity. You made the machine he trusted above all else begin to lie to him. Back in Seattle, Ethan was celebrating. He and Isabella hosted a lavish party at the penthouse to announce their engagement and the finalization of the merger. The great and the good of the city were there, champagne flowed, and Ethan stood beside his new partner, feeling the immense intoxicating power of their combined influence. He raised a glass to the crowd. "To the future," he declared, his voice ringing with triumph. "To Sterling Blackwood, an empire built not on bricks and mortar, but on speed, intelligence, and a relentless vision." As the guests applauded, his phone buzzed. It was a priority alert from his head of operations. He glanced at it, a slight frown touching his lips. Subject: minor algorithmic drift, Alpha 7. Message seeing fractional percentage underperformance on the A7 algo. Probably market noise. Monitoring. Ethan dismissed it with a flick of his thumb. Market noise. An irrelevant data point. He put the phone back in his pocket and smiled at Isabella, oblivious to the fact that the first termite had just taken its first bite. The first week after the party, the minor algorithmic drift was just that, a whisper in the data streams. Ethan's lead quant, a jittery genius named Ben, assured him it was statistical noise. "The markets are volatile post-merger announcement, Ethan. It's just the system recalibrating. It'll smooth out." Ethan accepted the explanation. His Alpha 7 algorithm was his masterpiece, a complex piece of code that analyzed microsecond market fluctuations to execute thousands of trades per second. It had never failed him. The idea that it could be flawed was tantamount to questioning a law of physics. But the drift didn't smooth out. By the end of the second week, the fractional underperformance had become a consistent, albeit tiny, loss. It was like a slow leak in the engine of a Formula One car, not enough to stop it, but just enough to lose the race by a millisecond. In the world of high-frequency trading, a millisecond was an eternity. "Run a full diagnostic," Ethan commanded, his voice tight with irritation. "Strip the code down to its foundation and rebuild it. I want a report by morning." Ben and his team worked for 36 hours straight, fueled by caffeine and fear. The report landed on Ethan's desk with a thud. "We can't find anything," Ben said, his face pale, dark circles under his eyes. "The code is perfect. The hardware is running at peak efficiency. There are no bugs, no breaches, no intrusions. On paper, it should be performing 5% better than it is." "That's not possible," Ethan snapped, throwing the report onto his desk. "Machines don't lie. Find it." This was Robert Thompson's first move, executed by Dr. Aris Thorne. The counter-rhythm wasn't an attack. It was a subtle form of financial aikido. It introduced a series of infinitesimally small, perfectly legal trades into the market that mimicked the behavior of Alpha 7, but were designed to resolve a fraction of a microsecond earlier. It was like a shadow that arrived just before the person casting it. The result was that Alpha 7 was constantly arriving a moment too late, buying a fraction of a cent too high, selling a fraction too low. The losses were tiny on each trade, but multiplied by millions of trades a day, they began to add up. It was an elegant, undetectable drain on Blackwood Capital's lifeblood. Ethan grew obsessed. He started spending his nights in the office, staring at walls of cascading data, trying to spot the ghost in his machine. He became irritable and paranoid, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. "Perhaps you're too close to it," Isabella suggested coolly one evening, as he ignored the gourmet meal she'd had catered. "You've been focused on this merger. Maybe you should let your team handle it." "My team can't see what I see," he retorted, his eyes never leaving the screen. "They're builders. I'm an architect. Something is wrong with the foundation." Then the second cut came. This one was executed by Julian "Ghost" Vance. Following Robert's instructions, Julian didn't hack the system. Instead, he exploited a long-forgotten backdoor in the server's firmware, a backdoor Robert himself had built 2 decades earlier for diagnostic purposes. He didn't steal data. He did something far more insidious. He slightly, almost imperceptibly, desynchronized the timestamps on a single random data server for a few nanoseconds every hour. The result was chaos masquerading as normalcy. A trade that was executed at 10:01 a.m. might be recorded as 10:04 a.m. To a human, it was meaningless. To a high-frequency trading algorithm that lived and died in the world of nanoseconds, it was catastrophic. It made the data untrustworthy. The system began to second-guess itself, creating micro-hesitations that led to missed opportunities. Ethan's profits, once a mighty river, were now a stream, and the stream was dwindling. He started lashing out, accusing his own people of incompetence or, worse, sabotage. "Someone in this room is leaking information," he roared during one tense board meeting, his eyes scanning the faces of his most trusted lieutenants. "Our strategies are being front-run. There is no other explanation." The paranoia began to infect the company culture. The collaborative energy that had fueled their rise was replaced by suspicion and fear. David Hayes watched his boss, the man he had once idolized, transform into a tyrant, haunted by a phantom he couldn't see. The third cut was the most subtle and perhaps the most brilliant. Robert, using a pseudonym, wrote a highly technical white paper titled "Quantum Entanglement and Systemic Risk in Latency Arbitrage Models." It was a dense academic paper that he seeded onto obscure forums and university servers frequented by top-level quants and financial analysts. The paper didn't mention Blackwood Capital by name. It simply posited a theoretical vulnerability in the exact type of proprietary architecture Ethan used. It argued that such systems, in their relentless pursuit of speed, had created a structural fragility so profound that a minor, almost random external event, a solar flare, a specific sequence of market trades, could trigger a cascading failure. It was elegant, terrifying, and utterly plausible. The paper began to circulate, passed from one analyst to another like a forbidden text. It became a whisper on trading floors and in the research departments of major banks. Have you read the quantum entanglement paper? No one knew who wrote it, but its logic was impeccable. The woman on the pension fund's board, Robert's former student, read the paper. She saw the connection between the theoretical risk it described and the aggressive strategy of Blackwood Capital. At their next quarterly review meeting, she raised a concern. "I'm flagging Sterling Blackwood for a risk assessment," she announced. "Their performance has been erratic post-merger, and there is a theoretical framework suggesting their entire model could be a house of cards. I recommend we reduce our exposure until we have more clarity." The pension fund was one of Ethan's largest institutional investors. Their decision to publicly announce a risk assessment was not a withdrawal. It was a red flag, a signal to the entire market that something might be deeply wrong at the heart of Ethan Blackwood's empire. The whispers were becoming a conversation. The tiny cuts were beginning to bleed in earnest. Ethan, lost in his own fortress of code, was so busy looking for a single enemy soldier that he failed to realize the very ground beneath his feet was being systematically hollowed out. He felt the tremors, but he couldn't find the source of the earthquake. His confidence, once his greatest asset, was curdling into a fatal arrogance. He believed he was smarter than the market, smarter than any problem. He never once considered that the problem might be smarter than him. The pension fund's announcement was the first domino. In the fragile ecosystem of high finance, perception is reality. The news of a major risk assessment on Sterling Blackwood hit the financial wires like a shock wave. Ethan, who had always meticulously controlled his public image, was suddenly on the defensive. "It's a procedural review," he barked at a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who cornered him outside his office. "Our fundamentals are stronger than ever. This is nothing more than market jitters from our competitors who are terrified of our new scale." He projected confidence, but behind the scenes panic was beginning to set in. The jitters were real. Other institutional investors, spooked by the pension fund's move, and the circulating white paper, started making calls. They wanted reassurance. They wanted data. They wanted to know why his flagship algorithms were underperforming. Ethan and Isabella worked around the clock trying to calm their investors, but it was like trying to patch 100 leaks in a dam at once. For every investor they placated, 2 more would call, their voices laced with a new sharp edge of doubt. This was the moment Robert Thompson had been waiting for. The foundation was gone. It was time to push. From his quiet study on Bainbridge Island, he made one more call this time, to a respected financial journalist he knew from his old life, a man who valued integrity above all else. "I'm sending you a package, Mark," Robert said. "No names, no sources, but the data inside is verified. It's a technical analysis of the trading architecture at a certain high-profile firm. It confirms with hard data the theoretical vulnerabilities outlined in a recent academic paper." The package was a masterwork of anonymous data dropping. It contained logs subtly altered by Julian, to be untraceable yet accurate in their implication, showing the nanosecond timestamp discrepancies. It included a breakdown of Alpha 7's performance, highlighting the inexplicable and consistent losses. It was everything a journalist needed to connect the dots between the rumors and the reality. It didn't allege fraud or hacking. It alleged something far worse in the tech world: incompetence and fundamental design flaws. Mark's article, published under a dramatic headline, "Cracks in the Code is Sterling Blackwood's billion-dollar algo." A house of cards went viral. It was a match thrown on a field soaked in gasoline. The market opened the next day to a frenzy of selling. The stock price of Sterling Blackwood, which had soared after the merger announcement, began to plummet. It wasn't a dip, it was a cliff. Ethan stood on his trading floor, a modern-day Captain Ahab, on the deck of his sinking ship, watching the red numbers cascade down the screens. "Buy it back," he roared. "Initiate the share buyback program. Stabilize the price." They started pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into buying their own stock, trying to signal strength to the market. But it was like throwing buckets of water against a tsunami. The sell-off was too powerful, fueled by fear and the damning precision of the article. Then came the margin calls. Ethan had leveraged a significant portion of his personal and corporate assets to finance the hostile takeover of Sterling Industries. The banks that had loaned him the money had done so based on the valuation of his company. With the stock price in freefall, the value of his collateral was evaporating. The first call came from Deutsche Bank. "Mr. Blackwood, your loan-to-value ratio is breached. We need an immediate wire of $200 million to cover your position, or we will be forced to liquidate your holdings." Before he could even process it, another call came from JP Morgan. Then another from Goldman Sachs. The cascade had begun. They were demanding billions in collateral that he no longer had. In a desperate final gamble, Ethan turned to Harrison Sterling and Isabella. "We need an emergency infusion from the Sterling Family Trust," he said. His voice strained a sheen of sweat on his forehead. "Now, to cover the calls." Isabella looked at him, her face unreadable. She exchanged a glance with her father, who had been watching the meltdown from the corner office with a grim satisfaction. "No," Harrison Sterling said, his voice laced with ice. "This company is toxic. Your name is toxic. The Sterling family will not be throwing good money after bad." "What?" Ethan stammered, looking at Isabella. "Isabella, we're partners. We're getting married." She gave a small, cruel smile. "The engagement was a means to an end, Ethan. A requirement for a merger that was until yesterday advantageous. It is no longer advantageous. In fact, you've become a liability to my family's name. The engagement is off. We're invoking the reputational damage clause in the merger agreement to sever ties. The Sterling name will be removed from the company by the end of the day." The betrayal was so swift, so absolute, it knocked the air from his lungs. He had been a tool, a disposable asset. He had discarded Clara for this, for a woman who was a colder, more ruthless version of himself. The banks didn't wait. As the news of the Sterlings pulling out hit the wire, the liquidations began. Blocks of his stock were dumped onto the market, causing the price to crash into the pennies. The algorithms that had made him a billionaire were being sold off for scrap value to cover his debts. His art collection, his jet, his other properties, all seized and liquidated by creditors within hours. By the time the market closed, the empire of Ethan Blackwood was gone. Sterling Blackwood was a defunct entity, its assets carved up and sold off. His personal fortune had been wiped out. He wasn't just back to zero, he was hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. He stood alone in the dark, cavernous trading floor, the screens now black. The silence was deafening. Just 48 hours earlier, he had been the king of this world. Now he was a ghost haunting its ruins. He stumbled out of the building a dazed, broken man. He didn't even have the money for a taxi. He started walking aimlessly through the rain-slicked streets of the city he once owned. And for the first time in the cold, hollow emptiness of his spectacular failure, he thought of Clara. He thought of her warmth, her kindness, and the child she was carrying. His child. The one piece of his life that had been real, the one thing of true value, and he had thrown it away for a ghost. The weight of that realization was more crushing than the loss of any fortune. The next few days were a blur of humiliation for Ethan. His name, once a synonym for success, was now a punchline in the financial world, a cautionary tale of hubris. He was evicted from the penthouse, the locks changed by the bank that now owned it. He walked out with nothing but a single cardboard box containing a few clothes and personal effects. His friends, the ones who had flocked to his parties and slapped him on the back, no longer answered his calls. He was a pariah. He ended up in a cheap run-down motel by the airport, the kind of place where the carpets were stained and the air smelled of stale smoke and despair. For 2 days, he didn't leave the room. He just sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, the full magnitude of his ruin crashing down on him. He had lost his money, his power, his reputation. But the loss that echoed loudest in the suffocating silence of the motel room was the loss of his humanity. He replayed that final conversation with Clara over and over in his mind. Her shocked, hurt face, the way he had called their child a complication, the cold, dismissive tone he had used to dismantle their life. He hadn't just been a ruthless businessman, he had been a cruel, empty shell of a man. Who had done this to him? He cycled through a list of enemies, Harrison Sterling rival hedge funds, disgruntled ex-employees. But none of it added up. The attack was too precise, too elegant. It wasn't a frontal assault. It was a quiet, systemic unraveling. It felt less like a corporate raid and more like a judgment. His assistant, David Hayes, was the only person who came to see him. He found Ethan sitting in the dark room and placed a bottle of water and a bag of food on the rickety table. "I'm sorry, Ethan," David said, his voice quiet. "Save your pity." Ethan rasped, his voice hoarse. "It's not a pity," David said. I think I know who was behind this. Or at least I have a theory." Ethan looked up, a flicker of interest in his dead eyes. "The day after you asked Clara to leave," David began tentatively, "I saw the returned wire transfer, the one for $500,000. It was refused by an account belonging to a Robert Thompson, your father-in-law. Her dad, the retired programmer." Ethan scoffed. "What about him?" "I was curious, so I did some digging. Not corporate espionage, just public records, old articles from the early days of the internet. Robert Thompson isn't just some programmer, Ethan. In the late 90s, he was known in certain circles as the architect. He designed the Loki protocol for secure transactions and the core logic for the Hyperion trading engine. Your entire company, my entire career. It's all built on the foundation of his work. He's a legend who chose to disappear." The pieces began to click into place in Ethan's shattered mind. The impossible-to-find flaw in his algorithm. The Whisper campaign is based on a deep, fundamental understanding of his systems. The attack wasn't random. It wasn't a rival. It was personal. It was precise. It was from the one man in the world he had never even considered a threat. The quiet father-in-law he had dismissed and disrespected. The man whose daughter he had broken. The realization was a physical blow. He wasn't outmaneuvered by a competitor, he was dismantled by a father protecting his child. It wasn't about money or power, it was about love and justice. All the things he had deemed liabilities. A wave of something akin to terror washed over him. He had picked a fight with a god of his own digital universe, and he had never even seen him. The sheer awesome power of Robert Thompson's quiet fury was terrifying. But beneath the terror was something else, a sliver of profound, gut-wrenching clarity. He deserved this. He had earned every moment of this agonizing downfall. He thought of Clara safe in her childhood home, protected by this quiet, brilliant giant of a man. He had thrown her out, believing he was casting her into the wilderness. In reality, he had sent her back to the safest fortress in the world. He looked at David. "Where is she?" David hesitated. "I'm not sure I should." "Please, David." Ethan's voice cracked, the arrogance finally completely gone. "I don't want to hurt her. I need to see her." David, seeing the genuine brokenness in his former boss's eyes, sighed. "She's not at her parents' house. Not primarily. I heard from a friend who knows her family that she's been volunteering. Something about helping people who are less fortunate. There's a community outreach center in the Beacon Hill neighborhood. The New Beginnings Center. She's there most days." Ethan nodded slowly. The irony was almost poetic. While he was losing his soulless empire, she was rebuilding her life by helping others. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't about getting his fortune back. It wasn't about asking for forgiveness, because he knew he didn't deserve it. It was about acknowledging the truth of what he had done to the person he had wronged most grievously. It was about facing the wreckage he had made not of his company, but of his own soul. He thanked David, took a long shower, and put on the last clean shirt he owned. For the first time in his life, Ethan Blackwood was going to face a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. He was going to face his wife. The New Beginnings Community Center was a humble brick building a world away from the gleaming steel and glass towers Ethan had once inhabited. The sound of children playing echoed from a small yard, and the smell of soup drifted from an open window. It was a place of real, tangible human connection, everything his former life had lacked. He saw her through the window before he went in. Clara, now visibly pregnant, was sitting at a table patiently helping a young girl with her homework. She looked serene. There was a quiet strength in her face he had never seen before. The ordeal hadn't broken her. It had forged her. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair was tied back, and she was in that moment more beautiful than he had ever seen her in a designer gown. His heart pounded in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide from the shame that was threatening to consume him. But he forced his feet to move, to push open the door and step inside. The warmth of the center was a stark contrast to the cold rain outside. A few people looked up as he entered his expensive, though now slightly disheveled suit, marking him as an outsider. Clara's head lifted, and her eyes met across the room. The laughter and chatter in the room seemed to fade away. For a moment she just stared at him. There was no hatred in her eyes, no anger. There was a deep, profound sadness, and something else, pity, that more than anything broke him. She excused herself from the table and walked toward him, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She stopped a few feet away, creating a space between them that felt like a chasm. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm and even. "What are you doing here?" He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. All the clever speeches, the boardroom negotiations, the commanding orders, all of it was gone. He was left with nothing but the raw, ugly truth of who he was. So he did the only thing that felt right, the only thing that could possibly convey the depth of his shame and the totality of his defeat. In the middle of the crowded community center, Ethan Blackwood, the former titan of industry, sank to his knees. He bowed his head low, his forehead nearly touching the scuffed linoleum floor. It was not a gesture of supplication or a plea for forgiveness. It was an act of complete and total surrender, an acknowledgement of his monstrous crime against her and their child. A gasp went through the room. Clara stood silent, watching the man who had thrown her out, now kneeling at her feet. "Get up, Ethan," she said, softly, but her voice held a new authority. He slowly, painfully rose to his feet, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet her gaze. "I didn't come here to ask you to forgive me, Clara," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "There are no words, no apologies that could ever be enough. I came here to tell you that I finally understand. Everything I thought was important, the money, the power, the empire, it was all dust. It was nothing. The only thing that ever had any real value in my entire life was you and our baby. And I threw it away. I am so sorry for the pain I caused you." He finally dared to look up at her. "Your father," he said with a ragged breath. "He is a great man. He gave me a lesson I desperately needed to learn." Clara listened, her expression unchanging. She had imagined this moment in her darkest hours, fantasized about screaming at him, about making him feel a fraction of the pain he had inflicted on her. But seeing him now, a hollowed-out, broken man, she felt no desire for revenge. She only felt a sad, quiet finality. "I accept your apology, Ethan," she said, and he felt a flicker of hope. But she continued, "I accept it, not for you, but for me, and for our child. We deserve to live without the weight of that hatred. But that doesn't mean there is a path back for us. You didn't just break my heart. You showed me who you truly are. I can't ever unsee that." She took a step back, reinforcing the distance between them. "I'm going to have this baby. I'm going to raise our son, and I'm going to teach him to be everything you were not: kind, compassionate, and a man of integrity. A man like his grandfather." The words were not delivered with malice, but with a simple, devastating clarity. "You can be a part of his life if you choose," she went on, "but not as my husband, not as the man who lives in my house. You can be his father, but you have to earn that title. You have to rebuild your life, not your fortune, but your character. You have to become a man that our son can one day look up to. That is your only way forward." With that, she turned and walked back to the little girl who was waiting for her, leaving Ethan standing alone in the center of the room. He watched her go, the finality of her words settling into his bones. It wasn't the ending he had wanted, but it was the one he deserved. There would be no magical reconciliation, no wiping the slate clean. There was only a long, arduous road ahead, a chance not to reclaim his lost glory, but to build a new life from the ashes, a life of meaning, and perhaps one day redemption. He turned and walked out of the community center, back into the rain. He had lost his fortune overnight. He had bowed before the woman he had wronged, and in doing so, he had taken the first painful step on the bridge of humility, leaving the monster he had been behind, with a long and uncertain journey toward the man he hoped he could one day become. The story of Ethan Blackwood isn't just about a man losing his fortune. It's a powerful reminder that true wealth is not measured in stock prices or bank accounts. It's measured in integrity, in love, and in the promises we keep to the people who trust us. He had an empire at his fingertips, but was poorer than he could ever imagine. In the end, it took losing everything for him to find the slightest chance at gaining something real, a chance at redemption. Clara's journey shows us the incredible power of quiet strength and the unbreakable bond of family. It reminds us that you don't need an army to fight a monster. Sometimes all you need is a father's unwavering love and the courage to stand on your own. What would you have done in Clara's place? Do you believe a man like Ethan can truly change? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you and served as a powerful lesson, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for listening.